The hum of the kettle was still rising when the knock cut through the quiet. Daniel Marin paused mid-pour, the whiskey bottle hovering above the glass. Barefoot and alone, he wasn't expecting visitors, especially not in this weather. Rain stitched the windows in slow, silent threads, the kind that settled in without warning. The apartment around him held its breath, bathed in the low, amber glow of the reading lamp. He didn't move. Could have been a pipe, a gust, a restless neighbor. Then came the second knock, softer this time, deliberate. He set the glass down. His building had no working intercom, no cameras, no curious doorman. Just a rusted buzzer no one used, and a hallway that usually smelled like old newspapers. Daniel opened the door. No footsteps, no shadow, just the hum of old wiring and, at his feet, a single brown file folder, placed dead center on the welcome mat, like a warning or an invitation. He looked both ways. Hello. Nothing. He picked up the file, dry despite the weather, shut the door, and slid the bolt across. On the cover, a plain white label, typed in block letters. Confidential. Eyes only. Back in his chair, Daniel turned off the kettle. He didn't feel like tea anymore. He opened the folder slowly. The first page was a copied memo. The second, a financial report. But by the third, his fingers tightened. This wasn't just any leak. Names of high-level cabinet members. Directives rewritten at midnight. Budgets redirected to entities with no names, just codes. One section caught his breath. A handwritten margin note scribbled in red ink. No press contact. Silence ordered. He flipped faster. A footnote referenced a special security protocol, tagged to the Secretary of Finance, Margaret Elwood. Daniel sat back. Elwood had been on TV just 2 nights ago, smiling, confident. The nation trusted her more than the Prime Minister himself. The report painted her as a liability. It suggested surveillance. Containment. He stood up, file in hand, grabbed his phone and dialed. Daniel. A voice answered on the second ring, groggy and annoyed. It's 6:30 in the morning. I don't care, Daniel said, already pacing. You need to hear this. Welcome to Echoing Tales, where horror lingers and mysteries whisper. Subscribe for chilling stories, true crime, and the eerie unknown. Now turn down the lights and let's step into the story. By 7:42 a.m., Daniel was in the newsroom of the Citizen Record, rain dripping from his coat, the brown folder clutched tight under his arm. The office was unnaturally quiet. A few heads turned as he rushed past rows of cubicles, water squeaking under his shoes. His boss, Tomas Keller, was in the break room, coffee in hand, watching the television with a hard-set jaw. The screen showed grainy CCTV footage, timestamps glowing red in the bottom corner. The headline read, "Breaking. Secretary Margaret Elwood reported missing." Daniel froze in the doorway. A reporter's voice played over the footage. Sources close to Elwood describe her recent behavior as distant, increasingly erratic. One aide said she appeared fearful, as if expecting something. Tomas turned. His face was pale. "You see this?" Daniel held up the folder. "She's in here." Tomas blinked. "What?" "She's named." "Sort of. They don't say it outright, but it's her. Redirection of funds, ghost projects, internal pressure to silence her. It's in the documents." Daniel laid the folder on the counter. "Someone put this on my doorstep last night." Keller didn't open it. Instead, he sat, slowly, sipped his coffee, eyes on the screen. "She's the most trusted official in the country," he said. "Do you know what would happen if we publish this? Riots. Markets crashing. We get 10 lawsuits before noon." "It's not about the risk," Daniel said. "It's about the truth." Tomas glanced at the folder. "You don't even know where it came from." Daniel stayed silent. "I say we wait. Let this play out. Maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe it's a fake. Maybe she just snapped and ran." "You don't believe that." "I don't want to believe anything," Tomas muttered. "For now, drop it. Forget about it." Daniel didn't argue. He just picked the folder back up, walked to his desk, and laid it beside his keyboard. The weight of it seemed heavier now. He didn't touch it for the rest of his shift. But that night, alone in his apartment once again, Daniel reopened the folder. It felt different in the quiet, colder. He went back to the margins, the codes, the pages that were nearly blank. Entire paragraphs had been struck out with thick black ink, lines obliterated. A few sentences had surviving words, but nothing that made sense. And then the names. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, most crossed out, some partially visible, others replaced with black bars and red type. Only a handful were untouched. Most he recognized. Politicians, donors, civil servants. One thing struck him now that hadn't earlier. Next to each redacted name was a symbol. A short vertical mark, like a tick. But one entry had two. And that name, it was almost readable. Almost. The next morning, Daniel arrived early. Coffee in one hand, folder in the other. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He went straight to Tomas Keller's office, shut the door behind him, and dropped the file on the desk like a challenge. You need to read it. All of it. Tomas barely looked up from his screen. We talked about this. I'm telling you, Daniel insisted. There's something here. This isn't just about Margaret Elwood disappearing. These files, whoever leaked them, they're connected. The surveillance, the funding shifts, that note in red, silence ordered. We be the first to run it. This is bigger than just a missing person. Tomas sighed, then looked up, his eyes cold, not tired. You bring me this again, and you'll be looking for another desk, he said flatly. You want to be a journalist? Fine. Cover the rally downtown. Write about traffic reform. You touch that folder again, on paper or air, I'll make sure you're done. Daniel nodded slowly, lips tight. Got it. He turned and walked out of the office without another word. Compliant in appearance. But inside, his pulse was thrumming. He started digging the moment he sat back down. Margaret Elwood, 49, Secretary of Finance. Widely regarded as the most stable hand in a turbulent administration. But something had changed in the last few months. That much was clear in the footage, in the way she moved, hurried, distracted, as if always checking behind her. Daniel followed the trail she'd left behind, not through government records, which were locked down tight, but through something far more open, her social media. The posts were sparse, professional, controlled, except for a handful. 6 photos in the past 2 years showed her somewhere rural, coastal, maybe seated outside a weathered pub with a woman who appeared only in glimpses. An older woman, always blurry, always out of focus, but always near. In one caption, Elwood had written, "Still the only person I'll ever let win an argument." Yellow heart. In another, "Strong hearts don't always shout. Sometimes they just sit beside you and stay." Daniel scanned the photo, sunlight falling on weathered brick, a painted pub sign visible in the background, the Juniper Well. A quick search told him the pub was in East Morris, a small coastal town 3 hours outside the city, barely on the map. One main street, population in the hundreds. He booked a train. East Morris smelled like rain, brine, and old stone. The Juniper Well sat at the edge of the square, quiet at midday. Inside, the bartender gave Daniel a wary look, then softened when he explained. "I'm looking for someone. She used to come here with Margaret Elwood, Secretary of Finance." The bartender raised a brow, glanced around, then leaned in slightly. "You mean May?" Daniel's heart picked up. May Elwood, Margaret's mother. Doesn't talk to many folk, but they were close. Margaret used to come down twice a month. Quiet visits. No press. No attention. Where would I find her? The bartender looked toward the far end of the street. If she's not down by the sea, she'll be at her cottage near the cliffs. But don't expect a warm welcome. He found her near the water. May Elwood sat on a rusted iron bench facing the tide, wrapped in a faded green coat and scarf. Her silver hair blew gently in the breeze. A walking stick rested at her side. Daniel hesitated before stepping closer. "Mrs. Elwood," he asked. She turned her head sharply, squinting at him, then frowned. "No more of your kind," she snapped. Her voice was sharp but trembling. "Leeches. Crawling in after the story's cold. You think because I'm old, I'll spill something? Go sell your paper to someone else. I'm not here to sell anything," Daniel said softly. "I'm not here to exploit your daughter. I think she's in trouble, and no one seems to care." May stared at him, unmoving. He didn't walk away. He didn't try again. He just sat, slowly, on the other end of the bench, silent, facing the water with her. Minutes passed. The tide shifted. A gull cried overhead. Finally, May spoke, so low he barely heard it. "She knew they were watching," she said. "She used to tell me there were people in her inbox she never replied to, letters that weren't hers in the office drawer, that they'd try to ruin her if she didn't fall in line." Daniel turned to her, but didn't press. She was strong, not paranoid. She knew. May looked down at her hands. There was something she had but kept. But maybe it's time someone took a look at it. The inside of May Elwood's cottage smelled faintly of chamomile and old wood. Faded photographs lined the mantel above an unused fireplace, most of them monochrome or sun-bleached beyond recognition. Everything in the home felt quiet, protected, like the walls themselves knew how to keep secrets. She moved slowly, leading Daniel into a small sitting room, her cane clicking softly against the tile floor. No more words were exchanged as she opened a drawer beneath a low cabinet and pulled out a small envelope and a plastic drive. "This," she said, "was something Margaret had kept 3 days before she went missing. I haven't shown it to anyone. Not the police. Not the press." Daniel took the envelope first. Inside was an old photograph, creased at the corners. The colors faded to a dull sepia hue. In the image, 2 people stood facing each other. One had their face scratched out in thick gouges, as if someone had taken a knife or some pointed tool to erase them. The other figure remained intact. Margaret Elwood, younger, perhaps 10 or 15 years ago, wearing a beige coat, hand extended toward the obscured figure, passing or receiving a small black box. There was something grim about the moment, something too serious for a casual snapshot. And that box, it didn't belong to the era or the setting. It looked modern, out of place. Daniel tucked the photo back in the envelope and nodded. Then May handed him the drive. "I've listened to it once. That was enough for me." Daniel didn't ask questions. He simply said, "Thank you," and left. Back in his apartment, rain tapping at the windows again, Daniel slid the USB drive into his laptop and hit play. The audio crackled at first, low static, ambient room noise, maybe recorded through a wall or behind a vent. Then 2 voices emerged, both male, both deep and strangely neutral, as if they were deliberately disguising themselves. "We can't have this go public. It won't. She won't talk. She knows what's at stake." And the others? "Handled. No loose ends." "Good. Then we move ahead. Same timeline. No delays." Silence. She should have stayed quiet. Brief static. Anything else? "One file is still out there, but it's buried deep." Then bury it deeper. Then nothing. But Daniel didn't stop the playback. He stared at the waveform on screen, tracking the final few seconds. There was something there, so faint it almost blended into the hum of silence. He turned the volume up. It wasn't noise. It was whispering, garbled, warped, and impossible to make out. But it was there. Words, or at least sounds like words. They were sped up, or slowed down and layered, maybe altered as sound scrambled. Daniel leaned back, heart beating just a little faster. Whoever made this tape didn't want the end of it heard, and that meant it mattered. He sat at his desk until long after midnight, replaying the audio again and again, slowing it down, reversing it, trying filters. But he wasn't a tech wizard. He knew the basics. What he needed now was someone who could pull apart the threads without breaking the whole thing. He opened his email and began to type. Hey Ben, I know it's been years since uni, and this is coming out of the blue, but I need your help. I have a recording, anonymous, buried inside something serious. The audio's been tampered with. I don't know how. Maybe scrambled, reversed, filtered. But there's a section at the end that doesn't feel like noise. It feels deliberate. Can you take a look? Please keep this off the record. I'll owe you more than a pine for this one. Daniel. He attached the file and hit send. Then he sat back and stared at the photo again. He pinned it to the center of the corkboard above his desk. A red string stretched to a printout of the transcript he had typed up from the recording. A second string led to a list of dates he had compiled. Times Margaret Elwood had gone off radar over the last 6 months. Vacations that weren't recorded. Appointments that weren't in official logs. Then came the list of names from the redacted file. The few still visible. 2 were confirmed dead. 1 had resigned under mysterious circumstances. Another had simply vanished. He pinned those next. Then he stared at the scratched-out figure in the photo. Who would go to the trouble of obliterating a face with a blade? Not someone angry. Not random. Someone careful. Someone who understood the power of identity and the risk of it being known. Daniel tried to shake the chill crawling up his spine. He failed. He glanced over at the waveform, still pulsing softly on his laptop screen, paused at the tail end of the recording. That last whisper, it was saying something. He knew it, and whoever had gone to the trouble of hiding it didn't want it heard. Just after 2 a.m., his phone buzzed. Ben Larson, got your file. Weird stuff. I'll crack it open tomorrow and see what I can do. Where you caught up in, mate? Daniel didn't reply right away. He looked at the photo again. Something I wish I could forget, he thought. But instead he typed. Something that's been buried. But not for long. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the office 10 minutes early. He didn't mention the folder. Didn't mention Margaret. Didn't mention May. To anyone watching, he looked like a man turning the page. Hair brushed, shirt pressed, fresh notepad in hand. His boss gave him a grin and a thumbs up from across the bullpen, visibly relieved at Daniel's course correction. But Daniel wasn't focused on the charity gala write-up or the fluff quotes waiting in his inbox. His mind was spinning elsewhere, circling one figure that kept emerging like a watermark beneath every photograph and every blog. Martin Greaves. Daniel had spent what little was left of the night digging into the man. CEO of Orex Solutions. Power broker. Public ghost. And yet, in the weeks before Margaret Elwood disappeared, Greaves had been everywhere she was. Background in footage, side-shadowed in group shots, even once standing half a step behind her on the steps of Parliament. He was never identified in captions, never quoted, never the center of attention. But he was there, a man who made a career out of handling government finance, with a reputation for discretion, speed, and silence. Now Daniel couldn't look away. By noon, he'd opened 24 tabs, cross-checked that were available from the redacted document against various government tenders. It didn't take long to notice a pattern. Almost every one of those names had, at some point, worked with Orex. Some as liaisons, some as consultants, one even as a temporary board member. One by one, they had all stepped away from public service. Quiet resignations, early retirements, dead-end appointments, or, in 2 cases, tragic accidents buried in the back pages of regional news. Greaves' name was never attached directly, but it hovered like smoke around a fire no one would admit was burning. Then came the blogs, obscure threads buried on conspiracy forums or independent Substack newsletters. Wild claims, half-sourced stories, but within them were consistent details. Mentions of secret briefings around a transitional finance structure. Anonymous tips about files that had gone missing from the Treasury archive. A whistleblower who claimed Elwood had been preparing to expose something larger than fraud. Something systemic. Daniel leaned back, rubbing his eyes. He scrolled through the last of the screenshots he'd taken the night before. One, in particular, stuck out. A candid photo of Margaret Elwood at a charity function, glass in hand, standing beside an older woman in a red scarf. The angle was awkward, mid-laugh, but in the background, almost hidden behind the catering table, was Greaves. Only half his face was visible, but the expression? He wasn't watching the crowd. He was watching Margaret. Daniel's fingers tapped anxiously against his keyboard. He had to dig deeper. By 1:30, Daniel was out of the office, slipping past the receptionist with a well-practiced, "Be back in an hour" nod. He caught a train heading south, just as he had the day before, this time bound for Bramley, where Orex had its regional office. If Central London was the brain of the company, Daniel suspected Bramley might be its throat, the place where quiet things were swallowed, buried, or redirected. He stepped off the train in a light rain, the sky gray and thin above the modest town. The Oryx office sat wedged between a solicitor's firm and a closed-down bakery, the signage gleaming too clean for the drab brick around it. He didn't go in. Instead, he waited across the street under a bus shelter, watching employees come and go. Men and women in navy jackets, corporate smiles, faces that blurred into the rain. Then one caught his eye. A woman in her 40s, hair tied back in a sharp knot, stepped out of the building with an umbrella folded under her arm. She lit a cigarette quickly, hands shaking just slightly as she exhaled. Daniel crossed. "Excuse me," he said. "Do you work at Oryx?" She froze, the cigarette half lowered. "Who's asking?" "Daniel Briggs. I'm writing a piece on finance transparency." Oryx came up. "I was hoping for a quote. Off the record if you prefer." Her eyes narrowed. "We're not allowed to speak to media. Especially now." "Especially now?" She didn't answer. He tried again. "Look, I'm not looking to twist anything. I just want to understand why someone like Margaret Elwood would be associating with your CEO in her final weeks. Any insight would help." The woman glanced both ways, then flicked the cigarette into the gutter. "She wasn't associating," she said. "She was investigating. Quietly. I think she was onto something about Greaves, about where some of the funds were going. She wasn't subtle about her suspicions." Daniel leaned in. "Do you know what happened to her?" The woman looked away. "Only that she was scared. And the week before she vanished, she requested all her calls be routed through a personal number. No one could reach her on company lines." She turned to leave. "Wait," Daniel said. "Do you think Greaves had something to do with it?" The woman didn't stop walking, but as she turned the corner, she said just loud enough for him to hear, "Greaves doesn't dirty his own hands. That's what makes him dangerous." Daniel stood in the rain, her words looping through his head. His phone buzzed in his coat pocket. "Ben Larson. Hey, you were right. That whisper at the end? Definitely tampered. Spliced in, slowed down. Working on reversing it now. I'll send it your way once I've isolated it. Whatever's hidden, it's not random." Daniel stared down on the message, heart pounding. Whatever was buried, it was about to surface. The clock on Daniel's wall clicked past 11:48 p.m. The flat was quiet, save for the rhythmic hum of his laptop fan and the low rustling of papers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. He was tired, but that particular kind of tired that keeps you moving, the kind that sharpens rather than dulls. For the last 2 hours, Daniel had been combing through corporate filings, press releases, and archive procurement records. Anything with the Oryx Solutions stamp. The deeper he went, the stranger the patterns became. Every major deal Oryx made in the past 5 years, whether with government departments, public-private partnerships, or international finance boards, had one constant thread. Martin Greaves. Of course. But just beneath that name, nearly invisible in the fine print, was another name. Smaller font, lower rank, always attached to logistical compliance or structural oversight. Bryn Havers. Daniel blinked, scrolling back to double-check. Bryn Havers. It appeared again in a financial disclosure from a transatlantic data migration deal. Then again on a shareholder call transcript, referenced only once. And again, buried in an internal staff memo from the Department of Infrastructure, signed off with a quiet B. Havers. He appeared over and over, until he didn't. Daniel narrowed his eyes. In the later documents, the last 18 months or so, Havers was suddenly replaced. His name vanished entirely, absorbed by someone else. A different signature began to show up in its place. E. Cartwright. Bigger name. Public-facing. Frequently quoted in business press. But no mention of what happened to Bryn Havers. No promotion. No press release. No scandal. No obituary. Just gone. Daniel's heart kicked up a gear. He began typing. Bryn Havers Orex Solutions. Bryn Havers Resignation. Bryn Havers Martin Greaves. Nothing useful. He switched to image searches, LinkedIn profiles, data leak forums. At one point, he landed on a semi-archived employee registry cache through an old careers website. There, in a blurry company photo from 2019, stood a narrow man with high cheekbones, dark-rimmed glasses, and a tie knotted too tightly against his Adam's apple. Bryn Havers, Internal Compliance Officer. Daniel clicked. The link was broken, but the image had a location tag embedded in the metadata. Larchwell, South Devon. Not a big city, not even a mid-sized one. Daniel pulled open another tab and searched Bryn Havers Larchwell. 2 results. One was a church bulletin from a local parish. The other was a digital flyer for a cozy cafe tucked into the corner of a quiet street, advertising homemade pastries and a flat white worth waking up for. The image showed a man behind the counter. Hair a little thinner now. The glasses still the same. Bryn Havers. Daniel stared at the screen for a full minute, then opened his phone. The next morning, as light broke over the London skyline, Daniel's voice was calm and clear over the phone line. Yeah, just taking a quick trip down south, he said. Thought I'd gather some street quotes on the election results. Working class voices, swing town sentiments. Could be a nice sidebar for the weekend. His boss sounded delighted. Exactly the kind of instinct we need, Daniel. Go with it. Send me bullet points tonight, and we'll frame it in tomorrow's brief. Daniel thanked him, promised updates, and hung up. He closed the laptop, slipped on his coat, and grabbed his notebook. But what he was chasing had nothing to do with swing voters. It took just over 3 hours to reach Larchwell, a quiet town flanked by crumbling hills and stretches of gray coastline, where the roads narrowed and the air felt older. Daniel turned off the main strip and followed his GPS through a winding residential area before pulling into a pay-and-display car park beside a florist. Across the street sat the cafe, Dovetail and Ash. Clean windows, handwritten chalkboard. The smell of warm cinnamon and espresso drifted faintly from the open door. He watched it from the driver's seat for a few minutes, scanning the inside for any signs of a back exit or hidden camera. Old instincts. Paranoia, maybe, but earned. Then he stepped out and crossed the street. A soft chime rang as he entered. The place was warm. Wooden beams, bookshelves stacked with secondhand paperbacks, 2 students tapping at laptops in the back corner. A few old-timers quietly reading the local paper. A dog asleep near the radiator. And behind the counter Bryn Havers looked older than his photos, though not by much. The years had taken some of the sharpness from his frame, but his eyes were still alert, guarded. He turned with a smile that looked rehearsed. "What can I get you?" "Just a black coffee." "Thanks," Daniel said. Then, after a beat, "Also, if you got 5 minutes, I'd love to talk." Havers blinked. "Talk. I'm a journalist. Not here for a quote. Not officially. Just, there's something I came across. Your name, actually, in connection to a man I think we both know." Havers' expression didn't change, but the smile fell away. He poured the coffee in silence, then gestured toward a booth in the far corner. "Give me 2 minutes," he said quietly. Daniel nodded. He took a seat, pulled out his notebook, not to write, just to have something on the table. He could feel the weight of this conversation before it even began. 2 minutes later, Havers approached with his own cup of tea and slid into the seat opposite. He didn't speak at first. Neither did Daniel. Then, "You're not here about coffee," Havers said. "No," Daniel replied. I'm here about Martin Greaves, about what happened at Oryx, about why your name stopped appearing on anything after February 2022. Haver's jaw tensed. He looked out the window, eyes scanning nothing. I don't talk about that life anymore, he said. I don't think it's over, Daniel said. And I think you know that. Silence. You were close, Daniel continued. Too close. Something happened. Something bigger than fraud. Bigger than tax loopholes or missing audit trails. Havers turned back to him. Do you have any idea what you're digging into? I didn't, Daniel said. But I'm starting to. Havers took a slow sip of his tea, then set the cup down. I walked away, he said. Not because I was threatened, but because I knew one day someone like you would come looking, and I didn't want to be forced to lie. He paused. I'll tell you what you want to know, but not here. Not now. You want the truth. Meet me tonight. 9 p.m. Coastal Road, past the church. There's an old lookout point. Come alone. Daniel stared at him. You serious? Havers nodded. Deadly. He stood, lifted his tea, and walked back behind the counter. Daniel remained seated, his coffee cold but untouched. Outside, the gray sky thickened, and with it, the sense that whatever came next might shift everything. Daniel sat in his car, engine off, the steady rhythm of waves crashing just beyond the coastal guardrail. The sky had turned gunmetal gray, a storm flirting with the horizon but never quite arriving. He'd been parked here for nearly an hour, watching the tide roll in and out, letting the tension of the day pool inside his chest like seawater behind a dam. The meeting was minutes away. Bryn Havers had agreed, somewhat reluctantly, to talk more, but only in a place with no ears, no lingering regulars sipping oat milk lattes. His phone buzzed against the dashboard. Ben Larson. Cracked it. Definitely something at the end. Sent the enhanced file. Listen now. You need to hear it. Daniel's thumb hovered for a moment, then pressed play. The first part he recognized. The same voices from before, now clearer, sharper. She's not letting go. Then we make her. Then came Margaret's voice. Breathy. Close. Terrified. I saw the accounts, Halloway and the other. Langston. A pause. Then rapid movement. Running footsteps. A door crashing open. Shouts. And silence. The file ended. Daniel stared ahead, hands still on the wheel, knuckles white. Langston. Halloway. 2 names. Not just familiar. They were fixtures of government. Langston chaired the Financial Oversight Committee. Halloway had served in 3 cabinets over the past decade, always somewhere near the Treasury. Powerful, shielded, and somehow tied to a corporate puppet master with a taste for silence. The car door opened. Havers slid into the passenger seat, glancing around before pulling the door shut behind him. Sorry I took so long, he said, wiping rain from his coat. Didn't want to be followed. Daniel just looked at him. Tell me about Greaves. Not the brochure version. Havers let out a quiet breath. Martin Greaves started Oryx Solutions in the mid-2000s. It was legit. At first, just a consultancy for public tax systems, helped in optimizing the calculation of how much money civilians paid in tax, and how to streamline the money to different departments. Governments love that kind of pitch. Saves them money, looks efficient, keeps voters happy. So when did it change? Hard to say. Slowly, subtle rot. Havers rubbed his palms together, a nervous habit. They started offering consulting services to specific political figures. Just little tweaks, overlooked tax forms, forgotten review checks. Then came the client tiers. The more incentive you have, the less tax you pay, and the more civilians like us have to give in our taxes. No one could prove anything, because the complaints would never even reach an office. And those who couldn't pay these unnecessary taxes added onto them, Daniel asked. For the ones who didn't pay, increased inspections, random reviews, fines for things nobody enforces anymore. They turned the tax system into a punishment engine. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. So fraud, with government blessings, Havers said bitterly. Or at least, certain officials looked the other way. Maybe because they were getting paid too. Daniel hesitated, then pulled out his phone. In this audio, I heard Margaret's voice. Right before the audio cut out, she whispered two names, Langston and Holloway. Havers closed his eyes. You recognize them? I do, he said quietly. Langston was one of the first big government clients Greaves personally handled. And Holloway, he's been around longer than anyone else in the inner circle. They were untouchable. Still are. But why would they be paying Greaves? No idea. That kind of stuff. Only Greaves knew the details. Maybe Oryx was laundering campaign funds. Maybe it was blackmail. Or maybe Greaves just had dirt on them both and sold protection. And Margaret? Daniel asked. Havers leaned forward, elbows on his knees. She was good. Too good. She started cross-referencing tax forms for some individuals. Looked at scheduling overlaps with Oryx. The same names kept popping up. Same clients. Same cities. She didn't say much at first, but you could see it. Something shifted. She was getting close. Did she come to you? Just once. She asked if I ever noticed how certain people didn't pay some forms of tax. How review flags appeared, then disappeared like they were never there. I told her not to ask questions. Not about Oryx. Not about Greaves. But she didn't stop. No, Havers looked away. She was going to leak it. She said she had proof. A file. Something from Greaves' personal archive. She disappeared a week later. Daniel sat in silence for a while. The ocean outside roared against the rocks. Do you think those names she whispered were the reason? I think she uncovered the wrong truth. And someone decided that truth was worth her life. Havers looked at him now, his eyes hard. You're walking the same road she did, Daniel. I don't know what you think you'll do with what you find. But these aren't the kinds of people who tolerate exposure. Why did you leave? Havers hesitated. I asked too many questions. Not out loud, but I started digging. Just enough to be noticed. Then someone left a file on my desk. Photos. Of me. My flat. My sister. No notes. Just a message. They were watching you. Even after I quit. Took a barista job. Changed cities. Made my life boring. Eventually they stopped. Havers reached for the door handle. Don't dig too deep, Daniel. You're not ready for what's buried. Wait, Daniel said. What about the box in the photo? The one Margaret was handing off. Havers frowned. I've only seen something like that once. Greaves carried it into an off-site meeting with Langston 2 years ago. No one was allowed near them. And when Greaves came out, he wasn't carrying it anymore. What was in it? Havers shook his head. No idea. But after that meeting, Greaves' company went from promising to untouchable. Like someone had flipped a switch. He opened the door and stepped out. Rain misted sideways from the sea, dampening his shoulders. Be careful, he said, then walked off without looking back. Daniel sat there, fingers gripping the wheel, heart pounding in his chest. Langston. Holloway. A black box that changes fortunes. A company laundering bribes in plain sight. A woman silenced. Daniel returned to the office 3 days later, slipping back into routine with the practiced ease of someone who knew how to wear a mask. He handed his boss a neat stack of notes, a summary of swing voter sentiment broken down by age bracket, region, and economic status. The man scanned the first page, then looked up, pleased. Now that's what I'm talking about. This is clean work, Daniel. Keep it up. Daniel smiled. Will do. Back at his desk, he leaned back in his chair, letting the murmur of ringing phones and clacking keyboards fade into background noise. His computer screen sat idly in front of him, but Daniel's mind was elsewhere, turning like a machine grinding old gears. Margaret, Greaves, Langston, Holloway, the black box. What the hell was in that box? It was like staring at puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit, each one important on its own, but the full picture still eluding him. Greaves wasn't just a man with political pull. He was a switchboard, a central hub of influence and manipulation. The two government officials weren't outliers. They were part of the circuitry. But Margaret, she was something else. She was the anomaly, The interference. The ghost in their system. Daniel heard the television before he saw it. The office's common area, visible through the glass pane to his left, had the news playing at a low volume. He wandered over, drawn by the broadcast. A news anchor with hollow eyes reported. A local man reported missing under unusual circumstances. Bryn Havers, a former financial analyst and employee of the private firm Oryx Solutions, has not been seen in over 24 hours. Authorities found what appears to be a handwritten note in his apartment, but no indication of where he may have gone or why. Police had declined to comment further. Daniel stood still, heart sinking. No images of Bryn flashed across the screen. Just a name, a brief mention, a headline that would vanish within hours. He knew better. They'd gotten to him. Havers was gone, just like Margaret is. In that box, Margaret had it last. Somehow, Greaves was connected to it. Maybe he wanted it. Maybe he had secrets in it that needed to be destroyed. Daniel had no idea what it contained, but it was now at the very center of everything. If he was going to finish what Margaret started, and stay ahead of whoever silenced her, he had to know what was in that box. Daniel packed his things quietly and left, telling no one where he was going. Officially, he was on assignment. Unofficially, he was chasing shadows. He drove across the city, following half-faded notes he'd scrawled from earlier research. It took time, effort, hours of staring at photographs, maps, old blog posts, and metadata. But eventually, he found it. The street from the photo. It looked almost the same. Clean brickwork, wrought iron fences, a row of identical townhouses. Time had softened some edges, but not enough to erase it. Daniel stepped out of his car and crossed to the exact spot where the photo had been taken. He pulled out the print. The image showed Margaret, half-turned, holding that distinct black box. The man receiving it was cropped mostly out, but it wasn't him Daniel was looking at. He held the photo up, aligning it with the buildings behind. Then he saw it. Faint, barely visible. On the back of the photo, behind the image, subtle ridges. A pressure mark, like someone had written something on top of the picture, not realizing it would imprint. Daniel flipped the photo. Nothing. Just a blank surface. But he knew he saw something. Felt it. He angled it against the sun again. There. Still faint. But undeniably there. He searched on his phone for photo labs in the area. Found one 3 blocks away. Small, independent. Specialized in restoration and archiving. Perfect. Inside, he explained what he'd seen, asked if they could bring out the writing without damaging the photo. The woman behind the counter, maybe in her 60s, nodded slowly. What you've got here is pressure writing. But more than that, it's chemical. UV reactive ink, probably from a fine-tip pen. Fairly uncommon. We've got a light. Let me show you. In a small back room, she held the photo under a dull violet glow. The words appeared like a ghost being summoned. A phone number. 10 digits. Daniel wrote it down on a scrap of receipt paper, thanked her profusely, and walked out with his pulse racing. He found himself in a park minutes later. Didn't remember driving there. It was the sort of place that looked untouched by whatever secrets people buried in cities. A few benches, some elderly trees, a water fountain. He sat, looked at the number again, then called. 3 rings. 4. Then someone picked up. Who gave you this number? The voice was male. Older. Calm. Daniel cleared his throat. Margaret. In a way. She left it. Silence. Are you alone? Yes. Are you being followed? Daniel scanned the park instinctively. No. Not that I can tell. The man exhaled like he'd been holding his breath. Then listened very carefully. Don't call this number again. Don't try to trace it. And whatever you think you're doing, stop. Daniel's voice sharpened. You knew her, didn't you? Margaret. You were part of it. I knew Margaret, the voice said. And if she gave you this number, it means she trusted you. Which means you're in danger. Why was she holding that box? What's in it? Another pause. Then, the answer to that question is why she's gone. And why Bryn Havers just disappeared. Daniel stood, his hand clenched around the phone. "What's in the box?" But the line had already gone dead. Thank you for watching Echoing Tales. Subscribe, ring the bell, like and share. Stay tuned, because this story isn't over. Not yet.